Hello again, my old friend. Tonight we venture beneath rusted fences and forgotten stone, where silence isn't empty and songs are more than echoes. In the hushed corners of the old world, where brick and steel once kept men caged, something older now stirs, fed by spores, prayers, and memory. So draw close to the warmth of your campfire light, let the wasteland wind settle into hush, and come walk with me down into the ruins of St. Florent Penitentiary, where the choir still sings and the fungus listens. Col de Vos crested the ridgeline just as the morning sun bled pale gold into the grey Appalachia sky, its light slicing through the cold mist that clung stubbornly to the ruins below. Her boots crunched softly against broken gravel as she adjusted the strap on her pack, then raised her holotape recorder to eye level. With a soft click and whir, it began to spin. Field log 283. Entry point St. Florent Penitentiary. Elevation 1,200 feet. Ambient radiation negligible. Audio phenomena active. She paused, letting the device record the sound that had drawn her here. Something faint, not wind, not bird song. Just beneath the threshold of hearing, a low hum vibrated through the ruined prison's bones. It was like the choir of a dying cathedral, sung not by voices but by spores. St. Florent had once been a federal holding site for wartime traitors and internal threats. Pre-war rumors claimed it was built atop a decommissioned Vault-Tec silo, though no evidence had ever been found. Until now. Calder had followed old scavenger maps, folklore interviews, and one particularly cracked ghoul preacher who insisted the place had become sacred, not because of who was buried there, but what still listened below. Nora was already waiting at the shattered front gates, her arms crossed and expression unreadable. Dust clung to her cargo jacket like a second skin. Her rifle, slung loosely across her shoulder, never truly rested. "You took your sweet time," she said, not moving as Calder approached. "I was listening," Calder replied, gesturing with her recorder. "It's louder today. Closer." Nora's gaze flicked toward the crumbling penitentiary beyond them. Ivy had swallowed much of the front facade, and the old guard towers stood like broken teeth against the morning sky. "You still think this is some Vault-Tec spore vault masquerading as a prison? I think something was buried here that didn't want to be forgotten," Calder said quietly. "And something else remembered it." They moved through the gates together, boots echoing down long abandoned hallways where rusted bars hung open like skeletal jaws. The air was thick with mildew and dust, but beneath it all was something, moist, alive. Every wall was veined with tiny green threads, pulsing faintly when the light shifted. In the old chapel, the remains of makeshift pews were pushed aside to form a spiral, bones arranged in careful symmetry. At its center, a lump of thick mycelium pulsed, breathing ever so slightly. "This wasn't natural," Nora whispered, crouching to study it. "Somebody planted this, cultivated it." Calder knelt beside her, already scanning the edges of the pattern. "They didn't plant it. They worshipped it. The choir, they called this place a mouth, not just a cell block, a mouth that sings when it's fed." She brushed a finger across the mycelium. A whisper slipped through the chamber like a sigh, barely there, but Nora stiffened. She'd heard it too. They pressed deeper, down into the lower levels. Cell block D was sealed behind a rusted security door, which screeched open only after Calder bypassed its half-fried circuitry. What lay beyond wasn't a cell block anymore. Candles had been melted into the floor in long lines. Strings of vertebrae dangled from the ceiling like wind chimes. And in the far corner, wrapped in tattered robes stitched from inmate uniforms, a ghoul stood with arms raised, eyes shut, mouth moving in slow cadence. He was singing. No sound came out, but the spores around him rippled as if responding to vibration. "Nora," Calder said, her voice barely a breath. "I think we found the choir." The ghoul didn't move when they stepped into the chamber. His song continued without sound, lips parting rhythmically, his eyes rolling beneath thin lids like he followed some inner rhythm only he could hear. The spores around him pulsed in time, gentle puffs that shimmered faintly in the flashlight beam, like golden dust dancing to a secret choir. Nora raised her rifle, her voice low but sharp. "If he moves, I shoot." "No," Calder said, grabbing her wrist, eyes fixed on the figure. "He's not hostile. Not yet. He's communing." "With what?" Calder didn't answer. She stepped forward slowly, the weight of the chamber pressing harder the closer she came. Her Geiger counter was silent, no radiation, just heat, moisture, vibrations in the soles of her boots, as though the prison itself had a heartbeat. The ghoul's eyes snapped open. He didn't flinch or shout. Instead, he tilted his head and blinked slowly, as though waking from a long dream. His voice was papery, fragile, like something long disused. "You're out of tune." Calder stopped in her tracks. "What?" He gestured to the holotape recorder at her hip. "You've brought a voice that doesn't listen. It records, it echoes, it doesn't Nora moved in behind Calder, gun still ready. "What is this place? Who are you?" "I was Warden Kilman once. Before the seed bloomed, before the earth cracked and the singing began." His head twitched toward the fungus-laced walls. "We sing now to keep it asleep, but it dreams louder than we do." Calder's pulse thudded in her ears. "You're one of the choir?" "Not one, first. When the vault opened below, the breath of God came with it. The prisoners knelt in fear, the guards. We were less fortunate." He stepped aside, revealing a stairwell half choked with vines and fungal growth. Each step oozed gently with moisture. Calder's eyes followed the descent, but her mind was already racing. "There's a vault below this place?" she asked, breath catching. Vault-Tec dug deeper than they were meant to. They brought spores from the greenhouse, Vault 22's children locked in glass. But spores dream even when sealed, and they learned to listen to pain. Nora's voice dropped to a growl. "And you let them out?" Warden Kilman's face cracked in what might have once been a smile. "The door was never locked, only forgotten." The hum intensified. The spores along the ceiling drifted downward in a slow, synchronized spiral, like snowflakes falling toward an unseen flame. Nora stepped back, her foot brushing a rusted canister, sending a clatter echoing through the chamber. At once, the humming stopped. Warden Kilman turned slowly, his smile fading. "You've disturbed the silence," he whispered. "It listens now." From below the stairwell came a wet, gurgling sound. Calder's breath caught in her throat. "We need to go," Nora said firmly. "Now." "No," Calder whispered. "We need to hear it, understand it. This is why I came." Nora turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief. "You want to get devoured by mushroom ghosts? Be my guest. I didn't sign up for a communion." Warden Kilman chuckled softly. "It's too late for departure. The spores know your scent now. You'll dream with us soon." A sharp crack echoed from the depths. Something had broken below. Stone or bone, it was impossible to tell. Calder turned off her flashlight, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Bioluminescent patches along the wall glowed faintly green pool, enough to outline the descending stairwell, enough to see movement. a shadow shifted just beyond the lowest step. Calder's hand trembled slightly as she raised her recorder once more. Her voice, calm but hollow, filled the chamber. Field log 284. Confirmation. Subterranean vault access detected beneath cell block D. Presence of spore-induced sentience confirmed. Vocal contact made with former Warden Kilman, now a member of something called the Choir. Signs of deeper infestation active below. Possible Voltec spore hive, or worse. Nora glanced toward the exit, then back to the stairs. She met Calder's eyes and saw something terrifying. Not fear, but hunger. Not for flesh, but for answers. "Calder," she said slowly, "whatever's down there doesn't want to be understood. It wants to grow." Calder didn't blink. "I want to know its name." The humming resumed. Lower, slower, darker. And somewhere beneath St. Florent Penitentiary, the song began again. The first note wasn't sound. It was sensation, a pressure in the chest like a held breath, followed by a slow thrum in the back of Calder's skull. The spores in the stairwell shimmered, vibrating to some inaudible rhythm, and the air grew damp with memory. Calder stepped forward. The stairwell descended at an unnatural angle, half carved into stone, half melted through layers of old prison foundation. Metal met fungus, stone met marrow. Nora stayed close behind, her rifle pointed down the steps, though the tight space forced her into awkward angles. Every few steps, she glanced back toward the stairwell entrance, gauging escape. Calder didn't seem to notice. Her holotape recorder blinked softly, picking up nothing but static and the low-pitched hum that now pulsed in tandem with their heartbeats. At the stairwell's base, the passage widened into a dome-like chamber, a forgotten sublevel, never mapped, never finished. The ceiling arched high above, its dome webbed in fungal tendrils that stretched like roots across a skyless world. Bioluminescent patches pulsed blue and violet along the walls, illuminating the floor below. There, arranged in concentric circles, sat the choir. Dozens of ghouls, hunched and still, heads bowed, faces lost beneath layers of cloth and moss. They weren't breathing, not visibly, but each chest rose in the same slow cadence. At the chamber's center stood a figure on a raised plinth, arms outstretched like a conductor mid-hymn. He wore no robes, only tattered remnants of a pre-war correctional officer's uniform fused with the bark-like crust of advanced spore growth. His face was obscured by a veil of translucent fibers that swayed as he moved. When he turned toward Calder and Nora, the ghouls did not stir. The music did. It wasn't sound in the traditional sense, no pitch, no lyrics, but the moment the figure lifted his hand, a wave of pressure rolled across the chamber, as if air had thickened. Calder dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by vertigo. Visions bloomed behind her eyes, vats of green glowing liquid, men strapped to gurneys, fungi sprouting from their mouths as they screamed in unison. Nora staggered but stayed upright, gritting her teeth as her rifle shook in her hands. The conductor spoke without speaking. Words formed directly in their minds, bypassing ears and language. He identified himself only as the voice beneath, and he welcomed them to the dreaming route. Calder struggled to her feet, voice raspy as she whispered aloud, "You're part of it. The spore, the vault." The voice's head tilted. His answer unfurled in images. Vault tech scientists in hazmat suits, wheeling pods of glowing fungus through underground tunnels. A failed experiment in containment, a breach, a song of pain that mutated into worship. The choir had not been formed, they had been rewritten. Nora spat on the ground. "This is a hive, a grave pretending to be a church." "Worse," Calder murmured, awe tinged with dread. It's a sanctuary. They sing to soothe it, to keep it from becoming angry. Then the choir stirred. One by one the ghouls began to hum, not with voices but through their chests, as if their lungs had become windpipes of hollow bone. The resonance filled the chamber like warm water, and the spores responded, blooming along the walls in wild, feverish waves. The voice beneath raised his hands again, and the song shifted. Not peaceful now, curious, hungry. Calder knew deep down that the vault below hadn't merely contained the fungus, it had taught it how to listen. Nora wanted to leave. Every part of her screamed it. The heat, the pressure in her ears, the way the air itself seemed to pulse. It all spoke of something wrong, something ancient and unwell. But Calder pressed deeper into the chamber, weaving through the hunched, humming ghouls with a reverence that chilled her companion more than any monstrosity ever could. She wasn't afraid. She was entranced. At the far side of the dome, a breach in the fungal lattice led to a narrow corridor that sloped further downward. The spores recoiled slightly as they passed, as if uncertain about allowing strangers deeper into their route. But they parted. They always did. Calder whispered into her recorder, her voice calm despite the oppressive atmosphere. Field log 285. The choir's song acts as a suppressant, a behavioral stabilizer for the spore colony. The frequency resonates through both organic and mycelial systems. This isn't a cult. It's a containment mechanism. You're romanticizing it, Nora muttered as she followed, her voice sharp. These people are prisoners, volunteers maybe, or infected, but none of this is right. It isn't sacred, it's a disease trying to wear a mask. They entered a long, curved hallway that had once been the foundation of the prison chapel above. Stained glass shards glittered in the fungal light, shattered and scattered across the floor. Pillars of bone reinforced the supports now, arranged with unsettling care. At the corridor's end was a sealed vault door, ancient and untouched, its emblem worn away by time and overgrowth. Calder ran her fingers across the metal and paused. There's no vault number, she said quietly. Nora scanned the door. No panel, no keypad, just a small circular slot in the center, surrounded by a crust of hardened spore matter. Calder glanced at her holotape recorder, then slid it into the slot. Nothing happened, but the spores listened. The air behind them vibrated, and a familiar figure stepped forward. Warden Kilman, his robed form swaying slightly as though moved by an unseen breeze. His voice didn't echo. It landed directly in their minds like a soft exhale. The vault has no name, he said. It was built to be forgotten, to bury the breath of green. The song is its key, the song is its seal. Calder turned to him, eyes alight. You're saying the door responds to the choir? Kilman nodded. Only the complete chorus may open it, only the sacred frequencies in perfect balance. But the choir grows tired. Our harmonies have fractured. Without unity, the seal remains. From behind her, Nora's voice was steady, but low. And what happens if the seal breaks? Kilman's smile was bitter. Then the dreaming becomes waking. The spores on the vault door pulsed once, slowly, eagerly. They followed Kilman back through the corridor, the fungus pulsing gently around his feet like grass bending in a breeze. As they returned to the dome, the choir's song softened into silence, and the room seemed to inhale as one. The ghouls raised their heads slowly, their hollow eyes trained on Calder and Nora with something like solemn expectancy. Calder's gaze swept across their faces, each more weathered than the last, but strangely peaceful, their mouths still twitching with the last echoes of the hymn. Kilman raised his arms, and the choir rose in near-perfect unison. The effect was chilling, coordinated without being robotic, as though they responded to the same invisible thread. One of them stepped forward, a frail woman whose face was half covered in layered fungus that shimmered like scales. Her voice emerged without vocal strain, clear and almost melodic. "We heard you long before you arrived. The surface carries many voices, but few harmonize." Calder nodded, stepping closer, recorder in hand. "You knew I'd come?" "Not you," the woman said, tilting her head, "but someone like you. The spores dreamt you. The vault remembers curiosity." Nora watched from the edge, unease growing with every word. "You mean this whole thing was waiting for someone? A stranger to just waltz in and open the door?" Another voice answered, this one from a shorter ghoul with sunken eyes and a long, vine-draped coat. "No, we are the lock. She is the tuning fork." Kilman gestured for them to sit near the edge of the dome. The choir gathered in a wide half-circle around the central platform. A low humming began again, but this time it wasn't just sound. It came with warmth, with scents of wet stone and decayed vegetation, with flashes of memory not their own. Calder saw images in her mind, experiments curling through airlocks, patients strapped down and screaming into silence, not just testing, taming. The choir sang, and Calder's body responded before her mind caught up. She trembled as a foreign frequency vibrated through her chest. Her limbs felt lighter, her thoughts slower. Around her, the spores on the walls began to ripple again, drawn to the resonance like moths to light. The vault door above, even sealed, was listening. Then the song changed. The tempo quickened, harmonies fractured. One voice sang a half-beat late, throwing the resonance off. Kilman's eyes widened. The choir stumbled, voices faltering, and one of the ghouls dropped to the floor, convulsing. A thick wave of spores burst from his chest like a sigh. The figure writhed, bones snapping, body curling backward as tendrils erupted from his mouth and spine. Nora aimed her rifle, but Kilman shouted, "No, do not sever the rhythm." The others surrounded the fallen ghoul in a half-circle, their song shifting into something lower, guttural, but somehow calming. Calder watched in awe as the creature, whatever it had been, turning into, began to still. The tendrils shrank, the body folded in on itself. The song lulled it back into submission. "Hal was out of tune," whispered the scaled woman. "Even one voice astray risks waking the seed." Nora lowered her weapon slowly, voice tight. "So that's it. You screw up one note and this whole hive becomes an apocalypse." Kilman nodded. "This is our penance, our purpose. We sing or we die." Calder leaned forward, eyes wide with something like wonder. "No," she murmured, "you sing, or everything dies." That night, or whatever passed for night this deep underground, Calder sat apart from the choir, her back against a damp pillar as she reviewed the day's recordings. The holotape spun steadily in her lap, catching faint traces of resonance that made her chest feel too tight and her skin too thin. She pressed a finger to her temple, trying to chase away the lingering pressure in her skull. The melody never quite stopped now. Even when the choir slept, she heard it beneath her thoughts, like a heartbeat behind a wall. Nora stood at the edge of the dome, arms crossed, eyes never still. She hadn't slept since they'd entered this place. Her posture was taut, a coiled spring barely contained. Her gaze kept drifting to the body of the ghoul who had lost his harmony. His remains were now cocooned in fungal growth, sealed into the wall as if returned to the hive that had birthed him. "You're getting worse," Nora said suddenly, not turning to face Calder. "You've got it in you now. I can hear it when you breathe." Calder looked up, her eyes dull. It's not like that. It's not an infection. It's a communion, a resonance. I'm not sick. You're sweating through your clothes in a cold cave, and your skin's starting to glow. She didn't reply. The glow was faint, greenish, just beneath the surface. A reaction to the spores, the choir had said. The early sign of alignment. Not decay, evolution. Doc Aldwin approached them then, carrying 2 mugs of something hot and bitter-smelling. His face, more decayed than the others, still held a gentleness, a lucid sadness that made Calder feel safe. He passed a mug to each of them, then knelt beside Calder. The fungus doesn't kill right away. It learns you first, your rhythms, your patterns. It wants to fit. Nora refused the drink, still watching from the shadows. What happens if you don't fit? Aldwin's smile was faint. You saw it. Calder sipped the drink. It was earthy, metallic, not unpleasant. Is there a way to reverse it, to slow it? The music helps, he said, his eyes distant. But only so long. The spores, they dream of spreading. The vault downstairs, what's behind that door, is a seed cache, dormant, waiting. Our song is the soil that keeps it asleep. She stared at him. And what happens if it wakes? Aldwin met her gaze evenly. It won't be like Vault 22. That was a whisper. This is a choir. Nora stepped forward then, close enough for the firelight to catch the anger on her face. So what? You sit here playing bedtime songs to a bomb and hope it stays asleep? Aldwin nodded once. Because we're the fuse. Something shifted behind them. One of the choir members stood abruptly, his breathing erratic. Aldwin moved quickly, placing a hand on the ghoul's shoulder, whispering a calming note. The figure trembled, then slowly sat down, exhaling spores like smoke. Calder realized with sudden clarity they were all infected. Not just physically, the spores had rewired them from the inside out, tuning them to itself, turning them into an organic lock, a living ritual. She touched her chest and felt the vibration still humming there. The song was inside her now, and the vault below was listening. The following morning came as a shift in air pressure, not light. There were no suns down here, only the slow pulse of the fungus and the rising hum of the choir. Calder awoke to find a thin layer of white fuzz clinging to her jacket. She brushed it off without thinking, eyes drawn instead to the figure seated just beyond the campfire's remnants. Warden Kilman, hunched and silent, watching her with eyes that had not closed all night. She rose and approached him. He didn't move, didn't speak until she was close enough to smell the sour, earthy decay curling off his robes. You want to know what lies beneath, he said at last, voice dry as dust. You want to see the vault. Calder nodded. I need to, for my work, for the Brotherhood, if they'll ever have me back. Kilman chuckled, a hollow sound. The Brotherhood seeks containment, but this? What's down there can't be locked away. It was born in locks, raised on failure. He rose, bones creaking beneath his robes, and gestured for her to follow. Nora, already awake and listening, fell in step beside them. Doc Aldwin trailed silently, his face drawn tight with worry. The choir did not join. They remained seated, humming a soft, uncertain tune. Kilman led them down a side tunnel, this one older than the others. The fungus was thinner here. The walls lined with corroded metal panels and obsolete security markings. A faint symbol, almost eroded away, showed the faded Vault-Tec gear, overlaid with a handprint. No number, no name. They arrived at a rusted terminal embedded in the wall, its screen cracked but still flickering. Kilman gestured to Calder. "You wanted answers. Ask the dead." She tapped a few keys. The interface was primitive, likely never intended for surface access. But buried beneath system diagnostics and environmental logs, she found a file marked warden_override_vision. The log began with shaky video, static washing over a pale, gaunt man in a uniform. His eyes were wild, his face wet with sweat. His voice trembled. "This is Warden Jonathan Kilman. Day, I don't know. I don't sleep anymore. The dreams, they're not mine." He looked over his shoulder, then leaned closer. "We opened it. We broke protocol. The vault under the chapel. It wasn't ready. The spores, God help us, they sing back. They learn. We thought it was mold, a food solution, self-replicating crops. It was neither." Behind him a scream echoed, followed by a flash of green light. The warden flinched. They grew voices. They spoke to the inmates first. Promised freedom, reunion, forgiveness. The prisoners knelt. The guards. We burned. It didn't stop. The footage cut to black, and Calder's hands trembled on the keyboard. Kilman's voice was calm now, distant. "I survived the breach. I fled into the upper prison, sealed the tunnel, and waited to rot. But the spores came anyway, not with claws, with lullabies." Nora looked sick. "You're saying the vault wasn't just overrun, it was converted?" Kilman turned, meeting her gaze with eyes full of old fire. "No, it was heard, and it responded. A deep vibration echoed through the tunnel then, not from above, from below." Calder felt it in her bones. Kilman raised his hands slowly. "The vault is waking." The vibration passed through the stone like a breath, a deep exhalation from the sleeping colossus beneath them. Calder stared at the terminal, the warden's last words echoing in her ears, but it was Nora who turned first, her shoulders hunched like a hunted animal. She walked quickly back the way they'd come, her boots loud against the hollow floor. Calder called after her, but Nora didn't answer. She found her in the corridor near the dome, crouched against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes were wild, but not afraid. Angry. She didn't look up when Calder knelt beside her, only spoke in a voice half swallowed by memory. "I used to think this place was a story." Calder stayed silent. "My mother, she told me the prison was cursed, that Saint Florent swallowed people, but I thought it was just her trauma talking. She used to hum when she thought I wasn't listening. Slow, breathy songs. They never had words. She'd say they kept her dreams clean. I thought she was just broken." She looked up then, face tight. But she wasn't. She was part of this. Calder's breath caught. "Your mother was in the choir?" Nora nodded once. "Before I was born, she escaped. Said the choir was losing their voices. Said something beneath was whispering in too many keys. She ran while she still could. Settled in a little crater town west of here. Had me, tried to forget. But she never really did. Not when the spores already lived inside her." It made sense now, the way Nora reacted to the music, the humming she'd always noticed before Calder did. The sensitivity, the rage. Calder reached out slowly, placing a hand on Nora's shoulder. "You've always heard it, haven't you?" Nora flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. "I didn't understand it until we came here. But now? It's louder, like it recognizes me." Doc Aldwin appeared at the tunnel's edge, watching them from the shadows. He looked like he wanted to speak but stayed quiet, his presence a gentle pressure in the air. Nora stood, wiping her hands on her coat. I came here to guide you, but now I realize I'm not the outsider. I'm a piece that wandered off and finally got called home. Calder rose too, her voice soft. Then, maybe you're not just a guide. Maybe you're the key. Nora shook her head. Or the fuse. From somewhere deeper in the vault, a second vibration stirred the dust along the floor. The choir began to hum again, and Nora's breath caught in her throat as she realized she knew the next note before it was sung. The choir's voices rose like mist, slow and heavy, curling through the air with aching resonance. It was not a song meant to comfort. It was a ritual, a warding, a desperate grasp at harmony against something vast and ancient beginning to shift below. Calder felt it in her teeth, the subtle dissonance, the way one voice just slightly dipped beneath the others. It wasn't off key, it was changing key. The harmony frayed. Doc Aldwin stumbled to the center of the dome, raising his arms with shaking hands. No, he gasped. No, you must hold the line. The song must not turn inward. Of the choir, a tall, slender ghoul with fungus grown down his spine like braided cords, began to convulse. His throat bobbed violently. No sound escaped, but his skin shimmered, shifting under the surface like something alive was writhing beneath. The rest of the choir tried to compensate, altering their pitch, their cadence, but it was already too late. The man screamed without sound. A bloom of spores exploded from his chest in a sharp golden burst. He collapsed backward, his limbs cracking at odd angles, bones stretching where they should not. Tendrils erupted from his back and anchored him to the floor. His eyes, glowing faintly green, stared straight into Calder's. And then he sang. It wasn't human. Not anymore. The sound came from somewhere deep, a subterranean bellow wrapped in melody like a choir of earthworms humming through stone. The spores reacted violently, veins of bioluminescence flaring across the walls as if shocked into life. The choir faltered, many collapsing to their knees, clutching their heads as the foreign resonance hijacked their frequency. Nora raised her rifle, face pale with fury. It's breached the loop, she shouted. The vault's no longer sealed. It's listening. Through him. Kelman stood at the edge of the chaos, robes fluttering as though caught in wind that didn't exist. He did not move to stop it. His eyes shimmered with something like awe. It's learning again, he whispered, after all these years. It's finding new ways to speak. The mutated ghoul's song rose higher, and the vault door behind them pulsed once with light. Hairline fractures began to glow along its seal, spores trailing like smoke from the edges. The sound wasn't just pressure now, it was suggestion. Calder felt it wrapping around her thoughts like a vine, coaxing her forward with promises unspoken. Nora grabbed her arm hard. We have to stop it before it sings itself open. Aldwin, now bloodied from his attempt to help, crawled toward them. The node is still vulnerable, he gasped. Where the bloom first rooted, sever it and the signal dies. Calder stared at the vault door, at the mutated ghoul, at the collapsing harmony around them. She made her choice. Show me the root. The root lay deeper still, beyond even the choir's reach. Doc Aldwin led them through a service shaft hidden behind a collapsed processing wing, sealed off decades ago by layers of rusted steel and mycelial overgrowth. The spores didn't resist. They parted gently at Aldwin's approach, as if recognizing him, or remembering. The way ahead was slick, narrow and steep, and the air thickened with every step until it became a living fog. The path wound downward in tight spirals, Pipes clung to the ceiling like dead vines, dripping water that stank of copper and rot. Calder coughed once, the breath catching in her throat like it had bones. Nora stayed silent, her jaw set hard, her fingers never leaving the rifle grip. Beneath her skin, the faintest green shimmer had begun to show, identical to the one now spreading across Calder's forearms. Baldwin stopped before a reinforced bulkhead, its hinges warped by age but still sealed. A faded Vault-Tec emblem marked the door. Just the cogs symbol, no numbers. Around the edges, spores had formed intricate fractal patterns like circuitry made from mold. This was the mirror wing, Alduin said softly. Not a vault in the public sense. A fail-safe repository. Overflow storage. When Vault 22's experiments exceeded capacity, they moved samples here, and the samples grew. Calder didn't ask. She already knew. They did more than grow. They adapted. Nora stepped forward and drove the butt of her rifle into the brittle control panel. The metal groaned, then sparked. The spores recoiled in a pulse, the fractals breaking apart like frightened birds. The bulkhead screeched as it opened, revealing a chamber beyond that felt immediately wrong. The air was heavier, viscous, and carried a warmth that didn't belong underground. Pale green light bathed everything in sickly luminescence, emanating from rows upon rows of containment pods lining the chamber walls. Each pod pulsed with internal growth, spores thick as snow sealed under cracked glass, and within every pod something moved. Not quickly, just enough to say it wasn't dead. Calder approached one, wiping away the film from the glass. Inside, a man hung suspended in semi-liquid, his skin split by tendrils that emerged from his spine and burrowed into the walls of the chamber. His eyes were open. "They're still alive," she whispered. "Not alive," Baldwin corrected. "Listening. They're nodes now, conscious anchor points. When the choir sings, they transmit harmony to these roots. But when the song fractures, they wake," Nora said grimly, "and they answer back." A quake shook the floor beneath them. It wasn't violent, but it was purposeful, like a great weight shifting in its sleep. Calder turned to the central plinth at the heart of the room. It was covered in vines but bore the shape of a control terminal. The screen flickered weakly as she approached, then buzzed to life, displaying a symbol she hadn't seen in years. Cognitive loop architecture, override, pending signal input. "It's listening for the choir," she said aloud. Alduin nodded. "And now it has new voices." The mutated ghoul's song above still echoed faintly in the structure, and the nodes were beginning to respond. A low drone vibrated through the air, rising in tempo. "We have to sever the signal path," Calder said. "If this system is the root, if we disrupt it, then the vault loses its voice," Alduin finished. Nora raised her rifle and took aim at the terminal. Calder hesitated. "We could learn from this, document it, understand what the spores are becoming." "No," Nora said. "We understand enough. This isn't evolution, it's assimilation." And then she pulled the trigger. The shot rang like a thunderclap inside the sealed chamber. The bullet tore through the terminal's core, sending sparks and molten plastic spraying across the moss-slicked floor. The screen shattered, its flickering image replaced by sudden, absolute dark. The pulsing in the containment pods froze. For a moment, all was still. Then the screaming began. Not from mouths, but from within the spores themselves. A high-pitched keening radiated from the walls, the floor, even the very air, like the fungus was shrieking in pain. Lights flickered. Moisture rained down from ruptured pipes. The pods convulsed, glass cracking, tendrils thrashing within like panicked limbs clawing to escape. Calder fell to one knee, clutching her head as the psychic pressure spiked. Pure signal feedback, a dying neural loop collapsing in on itself. Nora grabbed her by the collar and dragged her toward the exit. "Move! Now!" Doc Aldwin stumbled after them, blood trailing from his ears. "We cut it too deep," he groaned. "It's unraveling, no harmony left." Behind them, something vast began to stir, deep under the vault beneath the stone. A rumble not of machinery but of a body waking. The containment system had not just stabilized the spore network, it had focused it. With that gone, the fungal intelligence was no longer a choir, it was a soloist. They climbed through the shaft, the tunnel now lit by bursts of green lightning arcing between the walls. The spores recoiled and surged in waves, no longer synchronized. Above, the hum had become a roar. When they reached the dome chamber again, they found it half collapsed, walls cracked from the inside. Several choir members lay dead, or worse, bodies twisted, overgrown with uncontrolled bloom. Others stood frozen, mouths open in silent screams, spores erupting from their throats in tangled knots. At the center, where once stood the vault door, now rose a shape too tall, too wide, too alive. The warden had returned. He was no longer Kilman. The robed figure had merged fully with the spore lattice, his body split by vines and plated in bark-like armor. His eyes, now glowing fungal nodes, pulsed with rhythmic fury. Voices spilled from him, dozens layered over one another, speaking in fractured tongues, the choir's voices. Calder felt her knees go weak. He raised one hand, and the broken song echoed through the chamber. It wasn't speech. It was command. "You unsealed the breath," he intoned, his voice both many and none. "You cut the stem from the root. Now the bloom is wild." Nora stepped forward, gun trembling. "Then we'll burn the flower." The warden's head tilted. "There is no flame here, only soil." Tendrils erupted from the floor, curling toward them like vines in fast forward. Calder shouted, pulling Nora back. "We can't fight him directly. The spores are still linked to us." Aldwin coughed blood, eyes glazed. "There's one chance. The choir, the song. If we mirror the frequency, invert it." Calder looked to her recorder. She didn't hesitate. Calder yanked the holotape recorder from her belt, nearly dropping it as a pulse from the warden sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. Her fingers danced across the controls, tuning the frequency dial by instinct, not memory. The choir's last full harmony still lived within the reels, captured earlier in the dome chamber before the dissonance took root. It was imperfect, fractured, but it was still there. Aldwin collapsed beside her, breath shallow, his face already greying with bloom. Spore threads curled from the edges of his mouth, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You have to flip it, reverse the feed, let the echo reject the source." Nora covered them, firing burst after burst into the oncoming tangle of vines. The warden barely moved. He didn't need to. The chamber itself responded to his presence now, folding and twisting like a living womb in contraction. His voice rose again, and the pressure in Calder's skull built to unbearable levels. She screamed through clenched teeth, finally finding the playback reversal function. The tape clicked once, then began to spin backward. The first note echoed, and the spores reeled. It was discordant, ugly, like shoving a mirror in front of a nightmare and forcing it to see itself. The inverted harmony created a counter-resonance, a rejection field. The spores on Calder's skin peeled away, recoiling like scalded flesh. The vines around the warden trembled, faltered, then froze. He turned toward her, and for the first time, his many-layered voice cracked. "What have you done?" Calder rose to her feet, the recorder held high, its backward hymn blaring through the chamber. The choir's fragmented voices now howled in reverse, and the vault responded. The spores quivered, their network confused. The dome's fungal lining began to blacken. Walls wept ichor. "I'm giving your god a headache," she growled. Kicking. The warden roared, his form splitting in places where fungus and flesh could no longer hold cohesion. He reached out with one great limb, but Nora was faster, emptying her last clip into the pulsing core of his chest. The warden staggered. Calder stepped forward, voice rising over the chaos. "You built this hive on stolen mines, but now the chorus is broken, and your root has no anchor." The recorder surged with energy, its casing glowing white, hot as the counter-frequency built to a peak. Calder could feel it unraveling her from the inside out, the spores in her blood shrieking in protest. But she didn't stop. The warden lunged one final time, then froze, his form splitting down the middle, a cascade of rot and decay spilling outward. His body fell with a wet, crashing thud. Silence fell. The spores stopped moving, and for the first time since entering St. Florent Penitentiary, there was no song. Nora collapsed beside Calder, panting, her skin covered in blisters but clear of the fungal shimmer. Aldwyn lay motionless nearby, his final breath gone with the last thread of harmony. Calder looked down at the recorder. The reels had melted. So had the choir. They buried Aldwyn beneath the dome, what remained of it. Calder used the edge of a collapsed containment pod to carve his name into the wall above where he lay, surrounded by the silence he'd bought with his life. The spores around the chamber were inert now, greyish husks of once living threads that no longer pulsed or responded. The warden's remains had dissolved into a pool of inert biomass, a still lake where once a god had stood. Nora hadn't spoken much. She moved like someone waking from a long fever, blinking often, as if surprised to still have her own thoughts. The shimmer in her skin had vanished, so had Calder's. Whatever infection had begun in their blood, the resonance, the harmonization, it was gone. Burned out by the reversed frequency or shattered with the collapse of the root network. Either way, the song had ended, but not without cost. Of the choir, only a handful remained, those who had broken from the harmony before the collapse. They didn't speak, they didn't sing. They simply sat in silence, staring into the ruined heart of the vault as if trying to hear something long vanished. Calder knew what that silence meant. They had lost their god, and perhaps, in that loss, regained a piece of themselves. She and Nora spent the next 2 days mapping the ruin. The vault beneath the vault was inert, its systems fried by the frequency surge. The nodes, those half-living bodies in the containment pods, had all expired the moment the central loop was disrupted. The root no longer dreamed. They sealed the sub-levels before leaving, welding shut the tunnels, planting charges along the old choir chambers, rigging them to detonate as they climbed toward the surface, not out of cruelty, but mercy. What had once been sacred could not be allowed to wake again. As they emerged into the grey light of dawn, Calder looked back at the jagged silhouette of St. Florent Penitentiary. The wind was quiet. The ivy that once shivered with unseen breath now lay still against the stone. "No one's going to believe this," Nora said at last, her voice hoarse. "They're not supposed to," Calder replied. "They're just supposed to never come back." She raised the remote detonator, thumbed the switch. The charges ignited deep below, and the prison shuddered. Stone cracked. The dome collapsed. Dust billowed skyward as the last breath of the choir was sealed beneath a grave of its own making. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Calder reached into her coat, pulled out a fresh holotape, and slipped it into the recorder. It didn't whir. It didn't spark. She pressed play, and for the first time in days, there was no reply. The path away from St. Florent was slow. The landscape felt changed, less for what had occurred and more for what hadn't. No wind carried songs through broken rafters now. No scent of spores laced the morning fog. Just dust and ruin, and the ache of something ancient gone silent. Calder didn't speak much as they walked. Nora said even less. Their bodies bore the marks of their time below, bruises that ran deeper than skin, tremors that had no clear source. But they were alive. That counted for something. They passed the ruins of the chapel on the second day. Little remained of the building that once echoed with inverted prayers. Half-buried bones poked through the earth, like roots of their own. Nora paused to kneel by one, her hand brushing dirt from a jawless skull. "I remember this place," she murmured, more to herself than to Calder. "When I was small. My mother brought me here before we fled. She said it was a temple then, not for God, for forgiveness." Calder nodded. It became something else. But it started with people just trying to keep something terrible from waking. She stood, wiping her hand clean. "You think we stopped it for good?" Calder hesitated. "I think we stopped that part of it. But the fungus, it was never just one root. Spores scatter, seeds drift." Nora didn't argue. She only looked at the horizon and kept walking. They made it back to the outer wasteland after a week. By then, the last green glimmer beneath their skin had faded. Their breath came easier, but neither of them could sleep without hearing echoes of the choir, soft hums beneath the surface of their minds, like the soil still remembered what it had sung. The Brotherhood never came looking for Calder, not yet. Her name still sat on some exile roster, just another rogue scribe who chased ghosts into the deep. But she had something they didn't. Proof. Not of spores, not of vaults, but of what happens when the old world's experiments forget to die. Weeks later, in a quiet bunker just west of the divide, Calder sat alone beside a cracked desk. The recorder lay in front of her, a new tape spinning slow and steady. Her voice, when it came, was calm, certain. Field log 301. St. Florent Penitentiary status, collapsed. Choir dissolved. Vault Tech secondary root structure terminated. Estimated integrity of remaining spore colonies, undetermined. Local flora normal. No trace of harmonic resonance detected. She paused, fingers tapping the metal casing. "I don't know if we ended it, but I know what we buried. I know the shape of that song now, and the silence that followed it." She leaned forward. "And I know this. The spores dreamed of godhood, but they didn't understand worship. They understood obedience. They mistook silence for prayer. We taught them what rejection sounds like." In the corner of the room, Nora leaned against the wall, one boot propped against the concrete. Her eyes were tired, but there was peace in them now. Calder reached to stop the recorder, then hesitated. From outside, just beyond the cracked bunker door, the wind shifted. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a song. But it had rhythm, and somewhere far beneath the wasteland floor, the soil listened still.